Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar, the DevSecOps Journey, where it starts with Agile, DevOps, and application security. By way of introduction, my name is Javid Metz, and I work at Contrast Security in the Product Marketing Group, and I'll be presenting to you over the next 45 minutes or so. Let me start by saying I've spent a fair amount of my time, as well as with the team here at Contrast, working directly with customers and making sure that they can help navigate through business, organizational, technical and integration challenges that they might have as they understand the issues of how to get into a more agile DevOps and ultimately a DevSecOps journey. If you're not familiar with Contrast Security, we are the world's leading provider of security technology that enables software applications to protect themselves against cyber attacks in what we call the new era of self-protecting software. So the basis and outline of this presentation is to start initially by providing you with a bit of a backdrop at a macro level to see what the key drivers are in code and development and deployment, and the security considerations that are required for an effective software release process through Agile, DevOps, and even DevSecOps methodologies. And I'll go through many of the different approaches in greater detail and demystify some of the misconceptions around some of these concepts and technologies. So, as you can see from this chart from industry analysts at Gartner, high-performing DevOps organizations that incorporate security into DevOps report 50% less time spent remediating security issues, right? So, it's in the early stages that these technology adopters and innovators, they're the ones that are laying the groundwork and spearheading initiatives like DevSecOps. And it's no different for even for DevOps, and that's no different for even DevSecOps, where if you haven't started this process yet, don't feel as though you're currently being left behind, because Gartner also says that by 2021, DevSecOps practices will be embedded in 80% of rapid deployment teams, up from 15% in 2017. So contrary to popular belief, we're still at the early stages of DevSecOps adoption, and as we keep this trend upwards, it will become much more mainstream, and organizations that we speak to plan and want to increase the application security investment over the next few years as they realize its importance and overall business value. But before you're embarking on this DevSecOps journey, you must first understand and ask yourself the following. Where are you and your current organization at? What are your goals and resources that you have available for your next phase or your next iterative release of a major software development methodology that you can incorporate? There's a familiar saying, all roads lead to Rome, and if we use this metaphor for DevSecOps, right, we've got to understand that there are multiple paths and stages for this process to get to that DevSecOps stage. And using this phased incremental approach is really necessary, right? And that you need to first adopt some key core principles, and I'll touch on those in this presentation. Just to note, DevSecOps is not a final destination, but it's an evolution of some of the previous workflows that you've derived from established Agile and DevOps practices. And as you continue on your journey to optimize and speed up and add automated security to your development pipeline, you can see it's not necessarily an easy process to undertake and can be somewhat complicated at times if you don't follow proper processes and procedures correctly. Companies that I've worked with that do follow basic principles, best practices outlined in this presentation that I'll touch upon, they see huge justification for getting into DevSecOps, and they've realized many of the cost and process efficiencies. They've managed to rapidly deliver capabilities at a greater level, and leveraging automated security allows them to do that. So when you start this journey, you need to know where you're starting from before you plan and where you want to proceed to get the maximum amount of value and the greatest business impact. We need to first look and understand how and why there's this groundswell around Agile and DevOps initially, and how it started, how it grew, what the value and opportunities, and what are the key drivers that organizations are trying to see, and the investments that are being made out there in the industry, and how they can quickly respond to these changes in the marketplace so that they can remain competitive. Let's look briefly, let's just go back a few years. The birth of Agile and DevOps was around the 2008-2009 timeframe. just a few years later, around mid-2011, there was a seminal, a groundbreaking moment when Mark Andreessen said in a Wall Street Journal article that companies in every industry need to assume that the software revolution is coming. And he said that software is eating the world. So in the article, Mark was extremely optimistic about the use of software and that it was a catalyst for some companies that were adopting it. And basically he's saying that we're at the early stages of this dramatic technology and economic shift, and that companies that are leveraging software would overturn established industry structures, and that as more and more industries were being able to run on software and being delivered as online services, they would really change the way things are being delivered to customers. Additionally, in early 2004, the new CEO of Microsoft at that time, still there, Satya Nadella, he stated that this is a software-powered world, right? Microsoft really understands the power of software, and in particular, the developer community, and they've been at the forefront of technology and innovation for decades. Fast forward 4 years to June of this year, and we can see Microsoft acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion. You know, why did they do that, right? GitHub is a massive developer community with over 1.8 million businesses and over 28 million developers that use GitHub on a regular basis. It's an extremely popular with not only developers, but with companies listing projects and their code and even documentation. So Microsoft sees GitHub as a major collaborative hub and a strategic benefit to them. They see that developer SaaS is at the center of this new digital economy, and it's growing rapidly, and that every business is a software business built by developers. So Microsoft wants to stay competitive and more relevant with the software developer community. And as we look to understand the major shifts that are taking place in business and the technology environment, companies are looking at ways of streamlining processes to help them manage and improve, deliver their projects, and incorporate security within their code, as well as making sure that they achieve some kind of like regulatory compliance. The digital transformation benefits those companies that have made this software and have made these process efficiencies and made the investment there. And they're looking to provide greater customer experiences, you know, making sure that they've got greater stickiness, more customer loyalty, and obviously, hopefully that equates to greater revenue for them, reduces, you know, time and cost, makes them more efficient, so they can have much faster product delivery. And software can be used to transform that, to compete and to differentiate. And so ultimately, you want to make sure that you're creating value for customers, and that's what this digital transformation is going to do. If you look at the success of companies that leverage software and other digital technologies, just look at Amazon, for instance, versus legacy-based retail industries like Sears or Toys R Us. Look at Netflix versus Blockbuster. Think about Uber versus, you know, traditional taxi industries, or Airbnb versus, you know, traditional hotels and accommodation industry. So software rolled out faster and more frequently, and companies need to innovate and adopt Agile DevOps methodologies in order to accomplish this, right? They need new products and applications to be delivered into the hands of end users faster and help accelerate time to market. But more software produced and released faster and with greater velocity potentially introduces more vulnerabilities, right? It increases an organization's cybersecurity risk. So security needs to keep pace with the software development and Agile and DevOps and make sure that software is not being left behind. So security needs to be a key component of this digital transformation and software development. And software apps that are created must be deployed without compromising on any level of security. Let's first look at some interesting numbers that I found. New code written, and there's a lot of new code that's being written, and the number of apps is growing and rolled out much faster. In 2017, 111 billion estimated lines of code were being written that need to be secured, right? What's the result of that? Well, there's potential that new vulnerabilities and threats might be introduced as you're writing all this code, which means, you know, more potential risk for companies out there. Did you know that applications are the #1 source of data breaches? The more apps you have, the more likely that you will probably get breached, because more apps mean more risk, and applications are high-value targets for cyber criminals and hackers because they can potentially be exploited, and they could potentially get access to your assets, your data, your customer data like PII information, and disrupt your business overall. The majority, 84% of breaches, exploit vulnerabilities in the application layer. Yeah, there's lots of money that's being spent on network and endpoint security, and we understand that obviously that's money well spent on providing a perimeter solution, but I think we can all agree that we need a very comprehensive layered security posture for all the organizations that includes security in the application layer, especially when you look at statistics like this. And the median number of application vulnerabilities per app is approximately 20. I've read reports that range anywhere from 20 to 25 vulnerabilities in an app. So even just taking a conservative figure of 20 in this case for one app is a hell of a lot. So multiply that by maybe all the apps that you've got in your application portfolio, and just imagine how many potential vulnerabilities and risks that you might have. So here we can see how the software release methodologies have changed over the years, right? Software is being adopted at this really unprecedented rate, but it's putting a strain on traditional software development processes, right? In the early years of software delivery, there were lots of manual testing being done. It was very linear, very sequential, and teams like dev, QA, and operations, operated in silos. So we can see that with traditional waterfall methods that you see here, they wouldn't work in today's rapid release environments, right? In the old days, there was plenty of time to test. There weren't many releases, and security was brought in late into the process, right? And unfortunately, that adds costs, and it's very time-consuming. And so with long release cycles, it was very, very rigid, very siloed, and so it was very poor in terms of team collaboration and communication. Obviously, this old school methodology doesn't work very well in today's high-speed environment. Innovation brings change, right? And so companies realize that shorter release cycles, kind of like smaller batch sizes, needed to be incorporated. A fast sprint kind of format was required, and so sprint formats are also known as Agile kind of like formats. They removed the constraints of previous waterfall processes and also introduced a greater amount of automation. This process brings a more iterative and team-based approach, and in Agile, there are defined methodologies like Scrum, where Agile teams observed they were able to respond much more quickly and collaborate much better. But teams were still using, legacy-based scans, which still significantly, slows down the release process. So the next iteration in the release process is a more efficient and more modern workflow process through DevOps. DevOps continues to tear down the traditional siloed approach and creates a rapid service delivery approach, allowing for more frequent, faster feedback loops through monitoring, through a rapid and more frequent build, test, and release process. And obviously, when you adopt new processes, there's new challenges that come along, and you should, look at ways to integrate security testing solutions that can work seamlessly across your software development lifecycle. So IT departments have delivered new features faster than ever, right? And these demands and requirements for 24/7 availability and security, DevOps was a promise to do exactly that by fostering this high degree of collaboration and communication across the entire chain, from business, development, operations, and infrastructure, right? So, where do you start with DevOps? As an initial starting point, that I would encourage you would be to read an excellent book called The Phoenix Project. The book explains how companies can increase profitability, elevate the work culture, and exceed productivity goals through DevOps practices. There are three key foundational principles of DevOps, right? And basically, if you look at those, the first principle is this big picture way of thinking, emphasizing the performance of the entire system that you've got, and focusing on the business value as opposed to just looking at the performance of specific silos or individual departments. The second principle is about creating this right-to-left feedback loop, something that's very rapid and amplified feedback loops with a goal to have shorter and quicker flow feedback so corrections continuously can be made before it reaches a production environment. And then finally, the third principle, fostering this culture of experimentation and learning, and also taking risks, right? The book promotes learning from failures, and you probably heard, the tagline, fail fast and often, meaning you're not afraid of failure and you're making these rapid incremental changes and responding quickly if something goes awry. And it means that you're prepared to immediately respond or roll back. So there's adjustments and fine-tuning and tweaking that you can make. The book also highlights that using DevOps practices, organizations really do see a much greater collaboration, better communication between teams, enhanced techniques to measure and monitor processes, and providing this continuous and shorter feedback loop, and a seamless handoff between key constituents from the software development group and team to operations. And I also encourage you, once you've read the Phoenix Project, if you haven't done so, to read the DevOps Handbook. It's an extremely useful source of information to augment your DevOps learning and practices. And the book explains how to create world-class agility, reliability, and security, within an organization. So let's look at building secure CI/CD workflows. You need to make sure that you include security as part of your continuous integration, your CI, and your continuous delivery and development pipeline. It accelerates your time to market for your software and eliminates the need for development and operations teams to incorporate a new tool. Ideally, you need to have security solutions built in and integrated to your organization. The security solutions should integrate directly into these tools that you use at each stage of your software development lifecycle. With regard to CI, continuous integration, software engineering members within a team integrate their work with increasing frequency, daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Using tools like Jenkins, for example, allows you to automate that process for developing software, because speed is key to identify and solve any issues that might arise at this stage. And continuous integration allows these team members to automatically build and test code and prevent bugs from being deployed into production. With regard to CD, continuous delivery, this is brought in at the latter phase of the development journey. And here we can see dev, QA, and operations function as a single group, right? With continuous delivery, using automation testing at high frequencies. And sometimes when you look at CD, it's basically known as continuous delivery, but sometimes it can be called continuous deployment. Those terms are used interchangeably. So I've explained what continuous delivery is. For continuous deployment, this is just a practice which extends the continuous delivery with software updates that are done automatically and deployed into production multiple times a day. So let's look at the software supply chain. With software so predominant, it's important to understand the positive as well as the negative consequences and the impact of using open source software, also known as OSS. The use of open source code has grown in popularity over the years. Many companies of all sizes are using OSS in all major verticals. And the enticement of open source software is undeniable, right? There's a very vibrant open source community. They make significant contributions to this movement. developers are increasingly, using OSS and embracing it because companies realize the basic economic and productivity benefits that they can get from that. At a recent Contrast Labs research study in 2017 discovered the following, and I've highlighted this with an illustration, this iceberg visual. So if you look above the waterline, kind of the tip of the iceberg, 21% of code is comprised of custom or proprietary code, and that the average custom code application contains approximately 26.7 serious vulnerabilities. If you look below the waterline, just by sheer volume or the massive code produced, you can see that libraries constitute the largest percentage of application source code, approximately 79%, with an average of about 2.0 library vulnerabilities, also known as CVEs. So there's less in terms of the number of vulnerabilities found in libraries, but however, it should be noted that if those vulnerabilities are exploited, they can have a catastrophic result. We all remember the security exploit in the Apache Struts 2, the open source web application framework, right, for developing Java web applications, right? So OSS flaws are made public, and hence are not just open to you and the companies that you work with, but also for people that might want to do some, hacking and some nefarious things to your organization. So, again, being open means that everybody can get access to see when there are vulnerabilities. So the key thing that you need to do is make sure that you patch and fix immediately. So with that in mind, when you're using OSS, you and your organizations need to weigh the potential risks, since, as we can see here, right, most application code is comprised of OSS and libraries. You need to make sure that security teams can quickly and effectively respond to any open source breaches and identify and remediate in real time. So let's look at DevSecOps, rugged DevOps. There's a lexicon of words and phrases and acronyms that you see out there. So we'll get into the DevSecOps side of things. So organizations really need to realize that there needs to be greater collaboration and communication between the development and security teams, right, by encouraging them to work together for the common good of the organization. So what's the common good in this case, right? Well, it's security, right? Security needs to be top of mind whether you're in dev, test, QA, or operations. And, in the past, developers have not necessarily been measured on the security of their code or the applications delivered, right? So developers need to bear at least some of the responsibility when you're thinking about security being a key factor as you develop the code, right? It would be great if developers had security top of mind, and that both development and security teams could remove these siloed barriers and the competing set of priorities and hopefully accommodate each other's needs in order to meet the demands of the organization for better quality, for speed, security, and ultimately faster software delivery. So I look at security as being like the keystone of the central piece, that linchpin that locks everything together throughout the entire DevSecOps methodology. So you need automated security that helps minimize the friction between dev and security, and the willingness by all to look at these new approaches and get through the problems that they've got. I know it's easy for me to say, right, but it's harder said than done, but you need to understand that this cultural mindset, this shift, and exchanging ideas is really, really important in order to succeed, and that there's a willingness by all key stakeholders that needs to be done so that it can get some joint alignment to accomplish these goals. Here's a view of what security looks like from a developer's point of view, right? Security is viewed or has been viewed as a major speed bump, a roadblock, a major obstacle that just gets in the way of fast code delivery. I've highlighted in the previous slide some process innovations and changes that have taken place over the last few years, right? Remember the slide where we talked about waterfall, moving to Agile, moving to DevOps, and now we're in this era of DevSecOps. The question arises, why hasn't application security testing, moved forward? Why does it remain the same? When you look at security teams, a lot of the time they've used manual methods to secure their applications, right? And these manual security tools haven't kept pace with the rapid speed of DevOps and speed of delivery. So legacy-based software application security tools are viewed as blockers, right, by development teams. They get left behind. Security then loses its seat at the table. They lose credibility, and any voice they might have had is being cast aside. So if security gets relegated to the back seat or brought into the process as an afterthought late in the day at the very end of the testing or the delivery process, companies see that, that is a big impediment to deploying code. It gets very costly. The release processes are just much, much slower. So your company's ability to be more agile should be top of mind. And so making sure that you don't use manual security tools that are an impediment is key here. So remember we had the CI/CD workflow. If we just take that and we incorporate what's been going on in security, there's that saying, you need the right tools for the right job, right? When you look at application security testing tools, traditional legacy-based static and dynamic tools of yesteryear work great for these slower, siloed manual methodologies like waterfall or maybe even some of the early agile practices. But, times have changed and requirements and market demands have changed quickly and significantly as well. So legacy-based static and dynamic tools are insufficient in addressing the needs and the velocity of the code that's being produced and released in today's environment, right? When we think about even more complex technologies, whether it be cloud, containers, and microservices, we need to make sure that security tools are not just integrated with tools that developers and operations and security using, but they're able to scale in global environments. So what's happened in the past is when we've introduced legacy security tools, they've basically broken this loop, right? Adding legacy security tools have not helped in any shape or form, right? When we think about code reviews and static tools that are very manually intensive, these tools don't work, right? They can't handle the high frequency of releases. They're not automated. They're not iterative. They take too long. Similarly, for dynamic pen testing types of tools, right? They're expensive. They cause delays. They're not iterative. In high-velocity environments, they don't work very well. They need experts, lots of training and resources, and it can cost you a lot of time and money as well as time. And then when we look, at production controls, you've got WAFs. WAFs are well known to produce, way too many false positives, way too many alerts. They need constant tweaking, and they might even stop legitimate traffic. They're based on rules that you have to constantly fine-tune. They're very hard to scale, right? So chasing these false positives wastes a lot of time for you and your organization and doesn't provide you with that, with the keys that you need to get the code out faster. Causes a lot of frustration and a lot of friction. So again, I mentioned maybe some of the application security tools that you've been using might not fit in today's modern application environment. We know that static and dynamic security tools can be inaccurate. So just keep in mind, when a vendor says that they've got an automated APPSEC solution and all you have to do is click on the scan button, that's not true application security automation, right? It doesn't see what's going on continuously. It's not actually working in real time. It doesn't really scale. It's another, albatross or bottleneck for security, right? It's hated by development teams, and for that matter, probably security practitioners as well. So many of the solutions that static tools provide have too much noise, right? They cause too much friction, and they're just not ready in today's environments. Similarly, a lot of the legacy tools force compromise. They don't allow you to shift left. It's like pushing a rock up a hill, similar to this visual here. It's not elegant and it's not going to help you. So what you really need is a security solution that can really help in the normal processes that you want to get to for fast deployment. So how do you get to DevSecOps, right, and continues to shift left? A potential solution, and this is a philosophy that we have a contrast, is making sure that you incorporate some of the best practices that you may have seen in the earlier slide when we talked about DevOps, right? I've taken a little bit of creative license from the book, The Phoenix Project, that we went through earlier. So we've seen that organizations have embraced some of these workflows. So if we interpret and extrapolate some of the blueprints and frameworks outlined in the Phoenix Project book, we can look at this and see what we can do as we move towards DevSecOps. So going from that establishing a workflow, let's establish a security workflow. Let's make sure security automation is key here. Let's ensure that there's instant security feedback by leveraging other tools that you're using and integrating these for a rapid response. And let's build a security culture where security is top of mind, one where security is woven in to the code as early as possible in the SDLC. So one of the solutions, kind of like through this visual, is one where you've got these four pillars, if you want to put it that way. We understand that companies don't want another siloed security tool that's narrow in its fit, form, and function and just needs constant care and feeding, right? We know that you need something that's built and integrates into DevOps and that works seamlessly. You need something that's continuous, right? You want to make sure that you've got something that's got a matched accuracy that has extremely low, if any, false positives. And that you don't necessarily need a whole slew of security experts or a lot of training in order to work. Something that's automated and built into your SDLC, and finally something that's able to scale, right? A scalable solution that gives you access to your entire application portfolio, whether it's on-prem, in the data center, cloud, whether you're using AWS or Azure, in hybrid environments, VMs, or even containers. Oops, too fast. So you need to make sure that you're building security in from the very beginning versus bolting it on, which is what a lot of people are doing. And that your key developers and security practitioners are kept abreast in real time of what's going on. Here's just an illustration of, a DevSecOps pipeline. And if you look at, say, developers, right, they're looking for a security tool that provides them with vulnerability information in real time and make sure that the data and the information and notifications can be seamlessly integrated in real time. And so you've got tools that can be used by development, QA, test, and operations. For operations groups, they need to make sure that the security goals, they've got visibility into who's attacking and where the attack vectors are coming from. And then you've got to make sure that you've got some kind of management console, an analytics kind of hub, where you've got some telemetry from these different types of tools that feed into the hub, and it's probably got things like historical tracking, analysis, and notifications. And then if you ever need access to a report for, say, compliance or audit reasons, you can get a report generated quickly, right? So the DevOps pipeline should be designed with all these kinds of feedback loops in mind, and the feedback needs to be given to the key stakeholders in a matter of minutes or even seconds, right? Not hours or days or weeks. which is what you get with a lot of the existing legacy-based security tools. So here's an example of what we at Contrast do in terms of making sure you've got all the key things I'd outlined earlier when it comes to having continuous, accurate, automated, and security and scalable elements to your security solution, right? So Contrast is distributed, so it works in many places at once and it works simultaneously. That allows you to scale security across your entire application portfolio, from development to operations and from on-prem to the cloud. Most of the static and dynamic tools are very limited in how they integrate with other tools. But with Contrast, we can integrate with ChatOps solutions like Slack so that developers can get the word out directly from Contrast, an RSS tool, about newly introduced vulnerabilities that they need to remediate. Similarly, if you're doing continuous integration and deployment, Contrast can integrate with tools like Maven and Jenkins so that builds can factor in vulnerability assessment results. And all testing, becomes security testing. Contrast can automatically generate tickets for developers. And finally, if you're looking at the operations piece through Contrast Protect, we can identify and stop attacks in operations and feed attack information directly into a SIEM solution like, say, Splunk, so that security operations teams can get accurate attack information that they can use. So again, being able to integrate with all these different types of tools and being able to integrate with these technologies here is really key. So when you're evaluating DevOps security tools in order to get to DevSecOps, I've just listed some criteria on the left-hand side here so that you can see the types of things that you need to talk to a vendor about. I'm not going to go through each of these, but if you can see, just highlighting and making sure that when you have a dialogue that these things are discussed with the vendor and that you feel comfortable and making sure that you've got the right tool. And then even just looking at some of the key metrics to measure, looking at remediation, the percentage of vulnerabilities that are remediated, number of applications covered. Those are all things that you should be talking to your vendors about. So looking at some best practices from the field and some of the data that we've got, you need to make sure that you're bringing in security and shifting left as early into the process as possible, right? So if you look at the relative cost to remediate, let's say it's a factor of X, 1X within the design group. If you're not testing security, there are no security requirements. So as you go along the path and you get to the development stage, it's 6.5 times more costly to fix a vulnerability in development than it is in design. And if you don't fix it in development, you'll have insecure libraries, poorly written code, again, opening you to potential vulnerabilities there. And as we go along the software development lifecycle and we go into the testing period, we can see that it's a 15x factor in terms of the relative cost to remediate. And then in production, right, heaven forbid, there's a vulnerability in the production environment, it's 100x relative cost to remediate. Additionally, I put in a few best practices that we've seen and that we like to employ and talk to our customers about, again, both from an engineering standpoint as well as a security standpoint, making sure you've got dedicated security engineers or product manager or somebody that's a point person there, making sure you have access to libraries and that you understand where the vulnerabilities are coming from. Oops. And similarly, making sure that you prioritize backlogs in the testing environment and these are approved, and making sure that you deploy runtime protection for open vulnerabilities. So these are some of the best practices that we've seen out in the field. Here's a real-world example of a Fortune 50 IT company. So the good news is the vision for DevSecOps is that it's achievable, right? And again, we're using this case study of a Fortune 50 IT company. We can see that, in 2017, they had 2,000 developers, more than that, and that there's a 2.5x factor in terms of them scaling up to this year to 5,000 plus developers. And similarly, even if you look at their applications, 2017 they had over 500 apps, and they want to double that this year. And you can also see some of the outcomes that they've seen in terms of the numbers of serious vulnerabilities that they found, the percentage that have been remediated and fixed, and the average time to remediate has gone down significantly. So again, here's just a real-world example that we'd like to share with you. So in summary, key points to note on your journey, right? It might appear to some that, the road to DevSecOps can be challenging and even daunting. However, you shouldn't be discouraged, right? Establishing a DevOps and ultimately a DevSecOps ready security program is possible, as I've just demonstrated in the previous slide. You can see huge benefits and cost savings from using the methodologies that I've outlined and some of the best practices. And remember, this is a phased approach, and that by applying some of the key principles and practices, you can move forward at your own pace and leverage some of the key learnings. So we encourage you to start your journey and move to the next phase as you consider shifting left. And these are just some of the summary points that I've highlighted here, just making sure that, just touching on, every organization is now becoming a software company in some shape or form, and we discussed the digital transformation. That modern software development requires continuous application security with CI/CD. That there's a lot of insecure code out there, whether it's custom code or third-party OSS code, and that even though open source plays a major role for software development teams, recognize and keep in mind that there are inherent security risks involved when you introduce OSS. That if you want to shift left, that you have to have this cultural mindset for both development and security teams so that you can better collaborate and communicate, and that hopefully it'll result in less silos and more of a team effort and alignment. And then finally, just making sure that you're aware that in order to have true DevOps or DevSecOps, that automation is key here, that you've not only got automation, but you've got accuracy, ease of use, speed, scale, in order to get to true DevSecOps. So are we there yet? Next steps. Well, I encourage you to download a free version of our community edition at Contrast that we know will help empower development and security teams and improve security and protect web applications from APIs and attacks. So I encourage you to kick the tires and test one of your apps with our community edition. The URL is highlighted on the slide here, and you can also find this as well as more information on the Contrast Security website. So thank you, and looks as though I have overrun. So again, appreciate you all listening in on this presentation. I hope you found it valuable. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.